It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Joining us from London, Nico Hines, world editor for said publication. How are you, sir?
I'm well. Good evening.
Good evening. And good evening to Agnès Poirier, London correspondent for L'Express, who's gracing us with her presence here in the studio. Your book, Notre Dame, the Soul of France, is to be translated, next week here in France?
In 2 weeks' time,
In French?
Came out in Brazil.
Oh.
2 weeks ago.
In Portuguese?
And in Portuguese, and in Japan.
Okay.
Very soon.
All right. And that's all ahead of what it'll be the third anniversary? Second anniversary of the
15th
fire
of April
at Notre Dame. Alexis Poulain, co-founder of the news website Le Monde Moderne, the modern world. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And good to say hello to from New Delhi to France 24 India correspondent Mandakini Galat. How are you?
Good evening, Francois. Not so bad. How are you?
I'm okay. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. # World This Week. For Parisians tired of wondering whether the French capital is going to be reconfined, this week you could instead wonder if the British royal family is racist.
Sir, have you spoken to your brother since the interview?
No, I haven't spoken yet, but I will do.
And can you just let me know, is the royal family a racist family, sir?
No, we're very much not a racist family.
Very much not racist. Prince William reacting to his brother and sister-in-law's bombshell interview with Oprah. Everybody's been watching this, Agnès Poirier.
Yes. Who hasn't been watching it?
Why is it captivating the planet?
Well, because it's a culture clash, almost a culture war between the old establishment and the new establishment. Because if Prince Harry and Meghan want us to believe that they are oppressed by the establishment, well, they are the establishment. They are just the new one. Neo-aristocracy versus the old aristocracy. And also, I mean, there are so many things to unpack there. That culture clash between identity politics and victimhood on one side of the argument in California, Prince Harry and Meghan. On the other side, of course, the monarchy, which is an anachronistic and an archaism, and which stands for stoicism to the point of rigidity. And somehow we need to embrace one side against the other, but some of us don't want to, embrace any side at all. So it's very peculiar, and it's also a generation divide. There was a survey in the UK this week that showed that under 40, if you're under 40, you're completely, or at least 60%, are siding with Harry and Meghan, thinking that they've been treated unfairly. But if you are above the age of 60, then only 15% of people think that they have been treated unfairly. So it's, there are so many things going on there.
Yeah, and there's another divide, which you could call the Atlantic Ocean. Late-night TV hosts in the States clearly siding with Meghan. In the UK, different story. The Daily Mail headlining, William blasts back. And if you don't get the message there with that headline, there's also written that subheadline, as he and Kate show what duty really means. There's full coverage on the inside pages of their visit to an East London elementary school. Yeah, YouGov publishing a poll that shows a clear divide across the Atlantic. People think that the interview was largely inappropriate in Britain and largely appropriate in the U.S. Nico Hines, watch what you say as an Englishman working for a U.S. publication here.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? I think a lot of the reaction to the interview is based on the preconditions, the views that you had of these things. The fact is that the Queen is pretty much universally loved. She's got an 80% approval rating in Britain. And so if someone's going to say something that might upset the Queen or might undermine the Queen or might make the Queen feel bad, then a lot of people in Britain will instinctively kind of feel defensive on her behalf. Now, that doesn't mean to say that every criticism of the royal family is wrong. And perhaps the Americans are looking at it with a more a fair, clearer eye and are actually seeing what's happened. A lot of people in Britain know that there are problems with the royal family if they really think about it. But the fact is that they love the Queen as a person. They don't tend to think, yes, well, arguably the royal family is the very embodiment of white supremacy that took over the entire world, crushed people of colour all over, stole their wealth and became their rulers, forced them into things, even slavery, in order to try and civilise them. That happened, but if you talk to people in Britain about the royal family, they tend to just think about the cuddly characters rather than that quite dark history of British Empire.
Mandakini Galat, through which prism are people in New Delhi seeing this?
I mean, I have to say, Francois, it was all quite amusing. Speaking for the post-colonial world here, some of the reactions to those interviews in the West, Harry and Meghan stunned the world with revelations of racism. Well, nobody here was quite stunned. We don't even have to go back as far as, colonization to sort of look into this. It wasn't so long ago that Prince Philip was mocking the Chinese while in China. And, other gaffes along the way, which were written off as enduring foolishness. Well, the correct term for those gaffes would be racism. And I think Prince William's response or lack of a response too shows this unwillingness, this larger unwillingness to see race, to discuss race, and indeed to discuss the inequities born out of race. But really, not surprising to anyone here, it also looks like an Indian soap opera. After all, which daughter-in-law doesn't have problems with the in-laws?
Alexis Poulain, even highbrow broadsheet of record Le Monde ran a lead editorial on this story, where they said the British monarchy, a central instrument of British soft power, is now weakened. Your thoughts on the fact that we're paying attention here to this?
Yeah, Republicans paying attention to the Queen. Well, we always had, actually. But I think it's in my opinion, a rich problem, not even so about the monarchy, which has to change anyway. It's not the Vatican and the Queen is not the Pope, so it has to evolve. But it has to evolve to a point. I don't think the Windsor will turn into the Monaco family, for example. But there is something going on with the star system, Meghan is this, Harry is clearly choosing Hollywood versus Buckingham, but it's an issue about the rich and power, and both are two sides of the same
because you heard
power.
Agnes,
Yes.
You heard Agnes say there's a very 2021 subtext to this, talking about identity politics, about victimhood.
Well, let's talk about real victims. Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein is not in jail, and he hasn't answered any question from a judge. And Ghislaine Maxwell is in custody. Andrew has not been questioned. This is the real issue here. The royals are above the law. Whatever they decide, whatever they do, the real issue is there. Meghan, she's doing what she does best, marketing and communication about herself. That's all she does.
Well,
and then she will sell, they have this foundation, Archwell, and I know they sell any public appearances for whatever.
It's a brand competition.
Yes, of course.
Within the firm. Basically, Prince Harry and Meghan wanted to create a subsidiary of the British monarchy in California. Yeah. They thought they could have a foot in and a foot out and do their thing while, taking advantage of all the quirks of being royals. And the Queen and Prince Charles said, well, actually, you love the monarchy or you live it. Then Prince Harry says, well, I was cut off financially by the guy's 36 and he inherited almost $20 million from his late mother. And they are having this conversation, their $15 million worth mansion, beautiful. They are young, rich, beautiful, in good health, and they are free. They freed themselves from the royal family, and that's great. Why do they feel the need to actually dish the dirt a year later? This is where I think there's a culture clash, cultural war. But in the end, 40 million people lost their job in their country now, in the US during the pandemics, and they're just in their beautiful garden, telling
Are
us.
all the people who are talking about this wrong?
So it's a bit self-obsessed, I think, from their...
We don't care?
I think it's really symptomatic. It's like we don't care. This is all about the business, the show business.
Nico Hines, do you not care?
In a way, I wouldn't mind not caring, but I think the truth is that, look, Meghan Markle has been a bombshell, and British society has kind of liked not to address any difficult issues, just like British people. Everyone's unfailingly polite. Nobody ever confronts anyone. Nobody ever brings up their true emotions. We've just bumbled along and no one's tried to cause too much trouble. That goes for the royal family and that goes for the media. And what Meghan Markle has done is come in and just ripped the whole thing up. If you look at what she's done with the media, in the last sort of 10 days, she's forced the Daily Mail to run a retraction on the front page. She's forced them to pay damages. She's got the royal family in disarray. What's she going to do next week? These are issues that have been bubbling on in Britain for decades, and no one's ever really done anything about it. And what she's done is thrown the cards up in the air, and it's going to be interesting to see where they fall.
Yeah, and what's interesting as well is the rest of the world is discovering about all of these TV personalities. They knew who Oprah was, obviously. But then there's this TV host, Piers Morgan. He storms off set as he blasts Meghan Markle's claim of suicidal thoughts, quitting his ITV breakfast program. The spectacle a bit much, even for the royal-loving Daily Telegraph and its cartoonist Matt, who headlines this cartoon with a spokesperson for ITV saying, Piers Morgan says it's been a fantastic 6 years. ITV said some recollections may vary. A nod to the statement from the palace, Mandakini Gallat.
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you, Francois. What was the last thing you said?
Well, we're just talking about how this story now also includes the likes of Oprah and Piers Morgan.
Yes. Look, I couldn't care less about the family. Honestly, it bothers me to even call them the royal family. But what I do care about deeply is anything that sort of increases a conversation around the subjects of race and mental health. So first of all, Meghan, great that she brought up some really difficult conversations. And Piers Morgan, he's just a big baby, isn't he? I mean, he stomped off. He was in this for a day. Can we stop talking about him already?
Okay, let's do that. In commoner news, the European Medicines Agency approving the single jab Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's cheaper, it's easier to transport and store. However, it's anyone's guess when enough of the doses will arrive on a continent where, as of this Friday, less than 7% of the population has been inoculated. Meanwhile, as the Financial Times headlines, the woes pile up for AstraZeneca. It's now set to miss delivery targets, and there are safety fears over at least one batch that they have, prompting fear in Europe, as La Repubblica screams on its front page. Yes, the likes of Denmark, Norway, Iceland, and now Bulgaria and Thailand have suspended its use.
Jeg tror, jeg i lighed med alle andre ærger mig over det her og de potentielle konsekvenser, det måtte have. Men det er nok for tidligt at konkludere på den her sag. Når der er en risiko, så skal det selvfølgelig afdækkes.
Alexis Poulain, the AstraZeneca, it's just one problem after another. They may be in the clear. Maybe the vaccine's fine. I don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist.
Well, I'm not either, but it's not like we have a lot of vaccine available in Europe right now. And AstraZeneca is one of them. And we're already cutting it from the branch, saying, oh, well, we have to wait for more. Johnson & Johnson is bringing some more. But of course, everyone wants some Pfizer because it's new and it's got this new technology and apparently it's the best. But the issue here is really how the EU managed the whole vaccine issue and the sanitary crisis. And it's been very, very bad so far. We have been behind everyone in terms of engaging with the production of vaccine.
They would have been criticized if they hadn't gone for this bulk buying of the vaccines, because it would have been unfair to the smaller EU nations.
It's unfair
and
anyway.
They're being criticized
if you look at the way
for the way they bought them now?
the smaller countries anyway, or the eastern countries, are turning away from Brussels. They are going to Israel, they're going to Russia, they're trying to get more vaccine from elsewhere because it doesn't work anyway with this standard buying from Brussels. So there is a big learning from this crisis, saying that from the start, the EU has been behind because, of course, sanitary was not part of the Brussels remit. But it's time to think ahead and say, if we want to be real about this epidemic, and so far each country has been very different from one another in closing borders or not. Even Germany has been closing.
But that was the whole point of bulk buying the vaccines.
Yes, but first
to try to overcome the mistakes of the spring.
One standard policy for all the EU partners. We haven't been able to have this from the start, and now the vaccine is even worse because rich countries want more. Look at the Germans are not happy with this. The French are not happy with this. And then the Italians are not happy. They're producing vaccine and now they want to keep it for themselves. And everyone is kind of getting into this competition of saying, well, maybe if we had been doing like the UK with Brexit and ordering our own vaccines, we'll be better off right now.
Although there's no connection with Brexit and the way the UK went about it. Perhaps we're too generous and too intentioned in a way. Look at it. I mean, last week, Italy was accused of being protectionist, and even the EU for blocking that small shipment of vaccines to Australia. And then 2 days ago, we discovered that in the last recent weeks, the EU has been very generous, exporting 34 million doses to dozens of countries, when at the same time, the UK or the US are actually saying, look, we're going to not to export any vaccines we might be producing.
So should the EU not be exporting vaccine, not honoring contracts it made?
Well, it's facing a shortage. So should it be less generous and keep some of the vaccines it produces for its population? I'm not saying that's what it should be doing, but that's what the UK and the US are doing. And also there's this other story of the US sitting on 30 million doses of AstraZeneca when it hasn't actually authorized it. And we all know that vaccines actually last, 6 months in a fridge? So, the EU requested some doses and the Biden administration didn't answer, which is a no.
The New York Times reporting that the U.S. government's sitting on tens of millions of doses of AstraZeneca, and it's hesitating in letting go of the vaccine doses is at least partly related, says the article, to uncertainties with supply before a benchmark of late May laid down by Joe Biden. Vaccine production notoriously complex and delicate, and problems like mold grow and can interrupt a plant's progress. That's the reasoning there. Your thoughts, Nico Heinz? The EU tried to negotiate with the US on buying some vaccine back. It's not working, though.
I don't understand why these governments are just not getting on with it and getting this vaccine in people's arms. One thing that we have to be really clear about here is that the AstraZeneca vaccine, there is no evidence to link it to any of these deaths. It might one day turn out that there was an issue, but from what we know now, there is no known linkage. And people are dying in the thousands a day in hospitals of this awful virus. And people just need to get on with it. The Daily Beast was down at the train station in central Rome today, at one of the AZ vaccine centres. And the queue that was standing outside began to debate whether they should get the vaccine. Have you heard the news stories? Have you heard the thing? And before long, there was an argument in the streets between people. And obviously, Italians don't need a second invitation to start arguing in the street. But people were almost coming to blows over whether or not they should take this vaccine. Some people left and didn't take it. Other people went forward. There was one old man said to the crowd, this virus is much more likely to kill you than the vaccine. Go ahead and take it. And I think what's really important, as journalists, is for us to try and make it clear that despite all these scare stories, there is no evidence that this is causing any problem. If you heard the clip earlier of the Thai government talking about why they had stopped the rollout, they said because they heard something on the news wires. That's not scientific evidence, and governments need to really act up, or this is going to be another massive failure, which is going to cost, maybe, hundreds of thousands of more deaths if these vaccines aren't rolled out efficiently.
We take a quick break. We'll be right back and pick up on that point. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast world editor Nico Hines is with us from the UK capital, London. Agnès Poirier, London correspondent for L'Express, is here. Your new book, Notre Dame, the Soul of France, to be published, on the 24th? 24th of March. In French here. Alexis Poulain, co-founder of the news website Le Monde Moderne, The Modern World, is with us here as well. And from Delhi, France 24 India correspondent Mandakini Galat. Mandakini, I want you to listen to the French health minister, because we had the president here famously disparage the AstraZeneca jab at the outset. And now Olivier Véran, his health minister, siding with the European Medicines Agency.
D'après l'Agence nationale de sécurité du médicament, il n'y a pas lieu de suspendre la vaccination par AstraZeneca. Des enquêtes sont menées systématiquement à chaque fois qu'un effet indésirable grave est déclaré.
He's saying there is nothing to worry about. Your thoughts picking up on what we just heard there from Nico Hines about these worries over AstraZeneca versus the worries over COVID.
Yes, deep concern here in India over all the news about AstraZeneca, because it's only one of only 2 vaccines in India's inoculation program at the moment. But coming back to what Nico was talking about, this business of hoarding vaccines and some countries holding on to them and not letting others have them, this is just morally indefensible. I want to cite some numbers here. In India, for example, we've so far vaccinated 10 million, 20 million doses, and we've exported 58 million doses. And we understand there's no hue and cry over it. There's no debate over it. Part of it is because there's this understanding that India is, pharmacy of the world. We're the world's largest vaccine manufacturers, and much of what we're going to make is going to get sent out to the world. Which brings me to my second point, something that happened at the WTO yesterday, which is this proposal that India and South Africa have have brought to the WTO over the last several months, asking for the patents to be waived off the current vaccines. What that simply means is that allow the generic companies to make all the vaccines that are that are there in the world today, and allow these generic companies to sell these vaccines at costs like 50 cents or $1. Now, this proposal was opposed by the usual suspects, the US, the EU, UK, Canada, and surprisingly, countries like Brazil. Now, like I said, this is morally indefensible in the current scenario. Do we want to deal with this pandemic? If then we're going to have to put patients over patents. And, the global not standing up for big pharmaceutical companies again and again. This isn't the system failing us. This is the system working exactly as it was designed to work for the global north, for the developed countries. And we're just going to see a situation where countries like mine here in India, people are just going to be scrambling for these vaccines.
Alexis Poulain, you had the opioid crisis in the US, which threw the spotlight on how the pharmaceutical industry works. Here in Europe, we were kind of spared that. Now, though, with this, what Mandakini is talking about, the WTO and South Africa and India saying, hey, waive those patents on intellectual property for these pharmaceutical things, we're suddenly paying closer attention to what is that relationship between big pharma and political leaders.
Of course, the issue here is that, remember Emmanuel Macron's words saying that the vaccine should be the property of the world and not the property of the big pharmas. But when they realized...
But he did argue for keeping intellectual property
rights. Of course,
rights.
You need the property rights for a certain period of time But look, the people... actually finance the R&D for this vaccine, not the firm.
Public money.
Public money. And now we're buying the vaccine. And Pfizer, for example, is talking about $15 billion coming from the vaccine for 2021, and saying, it's just the start, saying that this would be a blockbuster in terms of pharma ever seen in the world. How can we trust these big pharma that have been already come down in court for on big issue with former medicine that they put on the market that were not okay? So they should pay, of course, for new medicine. But what Pfizer did, they just bought BioNTech, the German firm with all the innovation That's all they did. And no, they produced not enough vaccine, and they want us to pay for this. And yet you have countries, of course, saying we won't get vaccine until it's too late. And again, it's not the EU this time, it's the world. So it could be G7, it could be the UN, WTO or WHO. Nothing is happening on the world stage to push and saying this is a world health issue. We should change the way we actually think. It's not about money. It's about, putting the world back to track.
Failure of leadership when it comes to this?
Well, it's a messy time, and they are doing what they can. I have the feeling. But I agree with everything that has been said. I mean, it's also about vaccine production capacity. Suddenly in Europe, we realize how dependent we are on countries like China or India for pharmaceuticals. The fact that Italy is going to produce the Sputnik when it is authorized is actually good news. If Sputnik is authorized by the EMA in Amsterdam, then, fantastic news. And Sanofi, which didn't fare very well.
That's the French company, by the way.
That's the French company. And we can talk about the Institut Pasteur also, that didn't fare well at all. But at least Sanofi will be producing some vaccine, and we are all doing that, scrambling at the same time. And I mean, the more vaccines are, we now have 4, I think, authorized in Europe, but it will take time for them to be produced and to come our way. We need to be patient, but also to act at the same time.
All right. So, Agnès pointing out that the U.S. sitting on doses, but at the same time, their president promising that we'll have an almost return to normal for with inoculations by May, and all adults being able to enjoy their 4th of July. Joe Biden crowing after passage of a record-breaking $1.9 billion COVID stimulus package.
And I believe this is, and most people I think do as well, this historic legislation is about rebuilding the backbone of this country and giving people in this nation, working people, middle-class folks, people who built the country, a fighting chance. That's what the essence of it is.
Yeah, columnists like David Rothkopf in the Daily Beast hailing Biden as a champion of progressives in a way that Bernie Sanders could never be, Nico Hines. You've got the vaccines and the stimulus plan all at once right now.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Often it is crises which prompt these huge economic spendings. In most countries, it was after the Second World War that huge changes were made that restructured economies. But it really does seem as though the $1.9 trillion stimulus package could actually change the way some of the American economy works, with things like child tax credits and different ways that taxes will be evaluated going forward. Some of these are only going to be for a year, so we'll have to see if they last. But nobody expected Joe Biden to put forward one of the most radical economic plans in 100 years. It's really left everybody shocked. Bernie Sanders' plans seem like nothing now in comparison.
Alexis Poulain predicted it, right?
Did I? No. Well, it's surprising. And the issue is where the money is going to go. Of course, now the effort is to avoid systemic failure from the banks and the finance industry. So that is kind of done. But what happens if the economy is not, coming back on track? And that's the issue we have in France, in Europe, but also in the US. So it's good that we have the plan, but now how the plan is going to unfold in the future, in the coming month and year, we'll see at the end of the year. I think we'll have a better vision. One, with the vaccine, if it works, if the virus is put away, and 2, if the economy is starting back. If not, then we have an issue with the debt. And with the interest rates going up. And now we don't have the plan there for this.
And we don't have the plan for the time being here in Europe.
Yeah.
Contrast the United States, where bars and restaurants have already started reopening, with Brazil, where in many places they never closed. The results are tragic, with more than 2,000 dead of COVID on both Wednesday and Thursday, and long lines outside hospitals like this one in Sao Paulo. Populist President Jair Bolsonaro easing off his remarks of a week ago when he told Brazilians to stop whining. He even donned a face mask this week when he spoke.
A política lockdown adotada Lockdown policies adopted in the past were only intended to give hospitals more time to procure ICU equipment, such as beds and respirators.
Okay, he wasn't wearing the face mask there, but he did take it off as before. Agnès Poirier, Brazil is a cautionary tale.
Well, it's tragic because it's not as if this country doesn't have the capacity to, the scientific capacity or industrial capacity to deal with the pandemic, to even produce vaccine. And here we have. I'm just going to repeat Lula's words yesterday or the day before, saying this country doesn't have a government, it doesn't have an economic policy, it doesn't have a pandemic strategy. And it's becoming a danger for itself. Because we're saying that it's almost, I think, 80 to 90% of the intensive care unit capacity, and private and public hospitals are on the verge of collapse. And we're talking about big country, 13 million inhabitants, and they're also a danger for themselves, but for the neighboring countries too, because there's the famous Brazilian variant, which doesn't respond very well to the current vaccines. And I think somebody from the World Health Organization talked about a national laboratory, because the more variants you have, the more ferocious the COVID is becoming.
A national petri dish, what you're describing instead.
So it's a tragedy, yes.
Mandakini Gallat, we're talking about the country that, put the B in Brexit. Brexit in BRICS, excuse me. One track mind there. The fact that, and you mentioned it earlier, how Bolsonaro didn't want to sign on with, didn't want to team up with India and South Africa to try to pressure over patents.
Absolutely. As Agnes was saying, it's absolutely tragic what's going on in Brazil. And I must confess that at the start of the pandemic, I had imagined that here in India, we would see a similar situation, the healthcare system on the verge of collapse. I think the difference really is that the Indian Prime Minister, for all his flaws, never undermined the pandemic. He constantly sort of took it seriously. He, always advocated the wearing of masks, etc. So truly tragic, and this is a direct result of Bolsonaro's policies, or lack of policy, shall we say, and very, very surprising to not stand with India and South Africa. I mean, the one thing that could help with the situation in this country is getting as many vaccines into as many arms as possible very quickly, and certainly the belief amongst the global South healthcare activists is that this proposal would have gone a long way towards doing that, towards increasing the supply of vaccines by bringing smaller manufacturing units into play. So very surprising that Brazil didn't stand by the proposal.
There were lots of surprises this week in Brazil, including the Supreme Court giving the green light for Lula to run. Agnès Poirier was mentioning it a moment ago, that fiery first speech he made on Wednesday. Could call it the first salvo in next year's race for president. He was speaking just 2 days after the Supreme Court gave him that green light, dropping those graft charges on a technicality. Lula speaking at that same metalworkers union in Sao Paulo, where he ran for the first time for president all those years ago.
A minha vacina, e quero fazer propaganda para o povo brasileiro. Não siga nenhuma decisão imbecil do presidente da República ou do ministro da Saúde. Tome vacina. Tome vacina, porque a vacina é uma das coisas que pode livrar você do Covid.
Nico Hines, your reaction to that speech?
Well, it's so strange to see him back in the saddle. I was in Brazil when he was elected, and the excitement in the streets was absolutely palpable. People driving trucks down, waving flags as the election campaign built up. And I was there again when he left office and his protege Dilma took over. And he was still, I think, 80% up in the popularity ratings when he left office, and not many presidents can say that. And I think what you can see from what he delivered in that comeback speech is that he is willing to go toe-to-toe with Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro was able to be the populist and was able to outmuscle and overpower his rivals for the presidency when he won it last time. And now there's somebody who's willing to be up there and to take him on at his own game. You know, Lula's line, love life or love death, is the kind of cut-through line that people will be repeating all over the country.
And once again, it's going to play out here as well, because when we talk about Brazil and France, you're either right-wing or left-wing on this one, right?
Yeah, well, I think there's still a lot of black holes in the Petrobras affair, but it's good to see Lula's back. He's indestructible, basically, and of course, if he's back, it's going to be very difficult for Bolsonaro, given the way he managed the crisis.
The argument's been made that Bolsonaro needs a Lula, needs a firebrand opposite him instead of a moderate.
Of course, but if he has someone like Lula who's experienced, who's indestructible, who's got the popular feedback, and he has the... look at Bolsonaro and the COVID. It's a disaster. And if he goes in front of the electors next year, I don't think it's going to go well, just like for Trump or anyone that's going to go back to the electorate after such a bad management of a crisis like this one. So having Lula in front of him won't help Bolsonaro to secure his seat for another mandate.
All right, before we go, despite the crackdown, they're still marching in Myanmar. This Friday in Yangon, police firing tear gas as protests against the February 1st coup continued. The demonstrators again braving live ammunition in some other cities. Not all cops, though, agree with the methods and with the orders from above. Several have spoken to reporters after crossing the Indian border into Mizoram state, like this officer who spoke to the BBC. I refused to shoot. I said I'd rather side with the people. Mandakini Gallo, what's the feeling about on your side of the border about what's going on in Myanmar?
Yeah, as of yesterday, about 200 people had crossed over on the border that, the state of Mizoram in India shares a 510-kilometer long, very porous border with Myanmar. The Indian government has sort of put checkposts there recently and is trying to stop people from coming in. It looks like scores of people are waiting to enter. Over half of them are police personnel. And the accounts that we're hearing, much like the account from the BBC that you just played, is just... person after person, these policemen are saying that, well, we were being asked to fire on demonstrators. In my police station, over half of us support, the civil disobedience movement. Now, this is not surprising that they're coming into India. This has happened before. The people in Mizoram share deep sort of historical ties with the Chin state. Lots of people in the Chin state have family members here. For India, this is a huge cause of concern. The government certainly doesn't want these people coming into the country, and we're seeing enhanced checks on the border. But you also have to account for these family ties. I mean, a lot of the people coming in are family members of people who live here. So we expect to see the numbers increase over the coming days, and we'll really have to wait and watch to see how India reacts.
Yeah, more broadly, Agnès Poirier, we know how this movie ends, or do we? I mean...
No, but it's changing. Remember the last two times when the military junta seized power, in the late 80s and mid 2000. And what we're seeing is new. You know, there's been a democratic transformation of society there in the last 10 years. And it is the first time we see the civil society, they don't want to be deprived of their vote, actually. They voted for, it was an overwhelming majority for Aung San Suu Kyi's party back in November. They voted, they want her back. The fact that, the bank people, people working in bank, civil servants, medical staff are on strike. It does affect how the country is ruled, and the military junta suddenly, think, it's not going to be as easy as it used to be. Now, of course, China is playing the biggest key role here because they've vetoed the UN Security resolution condemning the coup. What we can do, what the US, the UK, Europe can do is to apply pressure, a financial sanction, perhaps more than they have done so far, because we know, for instance, that there are revenues coming, huge revenues. I think it's $1 billion coming from the sale of gas to natural gas. So there are ways we can apply pressure, but in the end, it's for the people to decide, what kind of power they want and for them to fight. But of course, they are paying a heavy price.
A heavy price indeed. A story we'll continue to watch. I want to thank you so much, Agnès Poirier. I want to thank as well Alexis Poulain, Nico Heinz in London, Mandakini Galot in Delhi. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.